Hello, hello. Hi, everyone, and a huge thank you for joining us today for a discussion on building AI strategy without falling for the hype. The webinar will last about 45 minutes, after which both myself and the panelists will head over to the Lead Dev Slack to answer some of your questions in the webinar Q&A channel. We should also have time to answer a couple of questions live, so please submit those through the Q&A feature here on Zoom, and we'll get to them if we can in real time, or we'll bring those with us over to Slack to answer there. Let's get started with some introductions. My name is Meg Adams. I'm a Senior Director of Engineering at the New York Times, where I have the great privilege of leading the engineering team responsible for the cooking product. Since we're here to talk about avoiding AI hype, I'll share what that means to me. I'm an AI enthusiast, to be clear, but as a leader in the space, I have noticed the buzz and energy around it can create this feeling of almost ambient complexity. AI is supposed to do all these things and change how we think about everything, and it's this brand new skill set we all have to learn. And I think all of these things can be true without being overwhelming, which is a needle I've heard from a lot of engineering leaders that's been difficult to thread. Today, I'm joined by industry experts who are here to share their experiences and insights around this topic. And I'll have each of you introduce yourselves. And as you do that, you each agreed to be on this panel about avoiding AI hype. So please also share briefly what that means to you. What interested you in joining the discussion? Massimo, I'll have you kick us off.
Thanks, Meg. It's an amazing pleasure to be here. I'm Massimo. I'm the head of machine learning and data science at Doppler. That is one of the biggest health tech companies in Europe, based in Barcelona. Previously, I was the head of machine learning for trust and safety at Bamboo Link. And why I'm here, what interests me on this panel, I'm in AI, and I was with my team shipping machine learning in production and AI in production well before the hype started. So if there's something that I would love the audience to take home is that no matter which wave we are in, and in this instance is AI, but again, could have been crypto before, there's nothing better than like well-oiled teams, strong strategies, clear visions, and amazing execution. So my role here is trying to demystify things a little and make sure that the audience can bring home these points. On no matter the wave, it's all about execution and strategy. Thanks.
Oh, I love that. I feel so held immediately. Thank you, Massimo. I can't wait to hear some of your stories. Plum.
Howdy. I'm Plum. I'm a Senior Director of Engineering at Row, a telehealth company based in New York. I lead the teams focused on our patient experience as well as our quality and release. I wanted to join the conversation. Transparently, I'll say I would rather spend my lunch hour talking about literally anything other than AI because it's all we're talking about. We can't avoid it in the industry today. And as Massa mentioned, AI isn't new, but the hype is accelerating and the hype is very new. And so if we're going to talk about it, I'd rather be in a balanced conversation with these folks where we can see it from all sides, not just treating it like it is going to ruin the industry and starting to like burn the printing presses like we did in the 1400s and 1500s about that. But I also don't want to go and say AI can solve all of our problems. So I'm excited to really understand where AI really helps and where maybe it is not quite the right tool.
Amazing. I'm so excited for that perspective. And thank you for joining during your lunch hour today. Really appreciate it. Diego.
Hi, I'm Diego. I'm a platform engineering leader at Microsoft. I'm working on Viva Engage, which is our enterprise social network. And what brought me here is some urgency to bridge the gap between the flashing lights in the headlines and the messy, not so easy journey of making AI deliver outcomes that we actually need. And for me, the exciting part is not that first demo, it's the behind the scenes grind. Taking that prototype into something scalable, reliable, and yes, boring enough to run every day without breaking. And that's what I care about, getting past the hype so AI delivers something you can count on.
Amazing. Welcome all. And again, thank you for being here. Let's jump right into some questions. Plum, some of the hype around AI is that it can do anything. How do you decide, or how are you deciding on your teams where AI is genuinely a good fit versus just bolting it on because it's available?
Yeah, for sure. Probably a bit of a lame answer, but AI is a tool. It is a very powerful tool. It is a very universal tool, but at its heart, it is still a tool. And so it has its strengths and limitations. You need to first understand what it's good at. And then more importantly than that, you actually need to understand what problems you want to solve and where that tool is good at solving that problem. So to give two different examples, right now we're working on implementing an internal log library across a lot of our microservices. Most of our microservices have a pretty similar shape. So it's tedious work, but it's pretty well defined. It's something you can prompt out and ask something like Claude to go through and make a lot of these updates without someone having to go and edit every line. And it's something we can validate programmatically. So it's a really great way to say, hey, AI is a really good tool for doing a first pass of this work. It saves a lot of time. On the flip side, if you say, we need to write this library that needs to understand a lot of our data types, understand a lot of our business, understand the context of all of these different services, you can do that with AI too. It's going to take a lot longer. It's going to be a lot of prompt engineering, or you could just in that same time write the actual output that you need and potentially be more efficient that way. So the use cases are not always very clear cut. And so you really need to weigh those costs and benefits.
Absolutely. Understanding the problems to be solved is typically a good first step in all engineering work, I would say. Massimo, your work in AI started long before the more recent interest and innovations in the space. I'd love to hear more from you about a time you took an AI prototype and put it into production. And did anything surprise you in that process?
Yes, like fascinating question. I have quite of an hot take on this generally, and I know that a lot of people in the audience that are potentially struggling with the first ML deployments or some of the first ML deployment might be surprised. But what surprised me is how easy it is or how easy it was on. The first deployment is always this massive wall with a lot of complexities, a lot of moving parts, because of course there are inherent complexities in dealing with machine learning teams, machine learning deployments, AI in production, but none of this is fundamentally different from the complexities that you have to deal when you deploy a high-performing, scalable, transparent technology product. And probably the biggest cultural shift and the biggest complexity is indeed around making the whole organization understand this, and even your own AI and machine learning team, because sometimes the rest of the company or the rest of the organization treats the machine learning team and the machine learning solutions as this black box that no one can really deal with. And sometimes, and I can, let's say, call me out on that, the machine learning teams likes to soak into this, oh, okay, we are special, we work on these very complex solutions that no one can understand, to potentially not have to deal with the boring, like exciting or boring aspects of infrastructural deployment, scaling up things, embedding transparency and monitoring. So what I realized after, let's say, almost a decade of leading machine learning teams is how easy it is as long as you know what you're doing. There is a little bit of a contradiction, but it's not that different from more classical engineering teams, and you have to bake in best practices from the get-go, and having strong engineers throughout. We worked on so many things, especially like my current job is quite recent, but again, I'm very proud that shipping a solution, an ML solution in my previous jobs, made the headlines. We contributed a lot to the company and to our users back then, and we created this cycle of successes and traction, and was through good quality engineering above anything else.
For what it's worth, Massimo, I think you're very special. What about integrating AI into an existing system? Anyone with a story to share?
Well, Viva Engage was very quick in productionizing Copilot integration, which was mainly targeted to content producers. And later the team followed with features that were enhanced by AI that were for content consumers. And what surprised me there was how quickly the team was able to iterate and make it better. The Viva Engage is a social network. Some people produce content and many more people consume it. And when thinking of consumers, this team, they leverage AI to increase the relevance of what was shown in feeds and activity summaries. And to be honest, the first attempts were not so great. And what made the difference for them, and I think this is a general principle, was having a tight loop between engineers and product managers. So together they were able to refine the outcomes, they tuned the prompts, and they built a strong set of A/B tests that can ensure consistency over time. So the surprise for me was how fast this team could iterate, evolve, and refine the feature into something that in the end was really good, really useful.
Awesome. I can tack on a little bit too. At the times, Cooking used LLMs to launch our scaling or our metric conversion feature. So people who are making a recipe in the US might want to use cups, and elsewhere in the world, they might want to measure in a different way. And something that we have been reflecting on about launching that into production into our existing system is we were partnering with a bunch of other teams to do that. And it all felt very like we're doing this new thing, and we didn't follow our normal structured process for shared contributions. It was more of this like rapid prototypey kind of process. And so as we're going into launching additional AI features this year, it's something we've been talking about of like how, again, when we come back to basic engineering practices, how do we set up our contribution model such that anything can easily be contributed to in our code base? So that's something we're thinking about this year.
If I can add something into that, because it's very interesting on one of the biggest challenges that I've seen on integrating AI system with non-AI systems is indeed for how much, of course, AI systems are deterministic, they are probabilistic. So in more classical, let's say, engineering or technological products, you are used to, okay, there is a specific input, there is a specific output, and then there is decades of literature on engineering productivity on how to make sure that you can structure the work, etc., etc. When you do AI, the time horizon for delivery is much more complex. There is data collection, there is validation, there is more uncertainty on, it's more experimental in nature, so you need to be ready for potentially longer development cycles, a little bit of unknowns. We don't know if we can actually be able to deliver something, and when something is going to be actually delivered with all the notes that I was making earlier, sometimes the outcomes are, you are not sure. It's not that if you have a specific input, you're going to have a specific output. You're going to have a specific output with X% probability. And then you sometimes have to take action over this probability. So even the best system on Earth, it's never, spoiler, it's never going to be 100% accurate. It's going to be 99.9% accurate. There is always going to be a mistake. And this is something that an organization that is used to deal with more controllable, let's say, because again, deterministic is the wrong word, but controllable outcomes we'll have to mature and learn on. It's never going to be right or wrong. There is always going to be, it's going to be right the vast majority of the times, but we need to build a muscle to understand how to deal with that 1%, 2%, 3%. There's no secret recipe, but depends a little on the domain.
Absolutely. We've been talking about getting things into production. I want to talk a little bit about handling internal pressures as engineering leaders. And Diego, you're very much in it, being a platform engineering leader. I'm sure there are a lot of internal conversations happening around generating value from AI adoption. How are you handling pressure from execs at the moment?
Well, pressure from execs is inevitable. Everyone wants to see results fast. And the way I handle is by making sure I know my stuff well enough so I can bring the conversations back to problems, outcomes, and how we'll measure success. When someone says something like, let's go faster, it can mean anything. It could mean shipping more features, reducing KTLO, or improving developer workflows. So if you don't take 1 minute to think and define what faster actually means in that context, you can end up chasing the wrong thing. For example, when we were looking at improving our development cycle, I went deep into our telemetry so I can identify bottlenecks. And one of them was review responsiveness. It's how long a PR sits before someone picks it up. And based on that, based on the analysis, we decided that in order to address the issue, we needed both process changes and a bit of AI assistance. So for me, framing the problem in terms of a concrete metric made the conversation much more productive because we had something tangible to bite, to focus on. And yeah, I actually love to hear from others in the panel as well. So how are you handling the pressure at the moment?
I can jump in first on this one.
Sure.
One of the ways is a lot of pressure comes from lack of information. And so as you were speaking to Diego, like giving more of those conversations, giving those information, we also like to show a bit more real time of the actual things that are happening behind the scenes. So we have Slack channels where folks are just sharing, hey, this is what I've been doing with AI recently, or in our engineering demos, if someone actually did something really interesting that our leadership might not necessarily understand the full deep inner workings of the code that they're working on. But if someone goes to our eng team and does a demo, leadership can see, hey, people are actually doing this day to day. There isn't just, oh, we say use AI and then we don't see anything and we wait for those output metrics. We're showing the process as it happens in real time. And that helps build a lot more confidence that, hey, we're trying this out. We're actively using these tools and we're seeing where it works and where it doesn't, and sharing the little wins. The mistake can be in waiting for that big ta-da moment, that big project, that big feature that demonstrates the value versus all the little micro wins along the way.
Yeah, the wins and the misses too, right? When things don't work, when you attempt to solve a problem and then you get results that are like lackluster, that's also, I think, important to share.
100% on this front, like all started, and I agree with execs, senior leaders ask you to go fast. And personally, I don't like to go fast. And this is also what I tell to senior leader execs. I like to go as fast as possible. And there's always the as possible on, sometimes there's inherent complexity. The world wasn't built in a day. What I try to build with execs, senior leaders, my own manager, that again, all of us have quite senior managers as well, is around building a relationship of trust and transparency. And usually transparency is not something that is embedded in a lot of ML teams, going back to what I was telling earlier, on not shying away from the complexity. On my role, our role is to be proxies for complexity, try to show what's needed, but not all the mess that sometimes we have behind us. But having this trusted relationship where if we are taking more time, it's because it's needed, and making them understand why it's needed and why it's worth it, always with grounded in the final impact, the metrics, being data-driven. And then, of course, there is always going to be this healthy pressure on bringing us a perspective that could allow us to be faster or slightly different than we were doing before. But trust and transparency is something that I'm trying to bring, let's say, with my teams, but also with everyone that is accountable for my work or our work.
Absolutely. And this is something that I coach managers on a lot, is communicating in a way that brings people along. And I think the broader AI portfolio and all the hype around it is a great opportunity for senior leaders to really demonstrate that. How are we holding gravity around this work? How are we bringing people's like fears and nervousness about all the things that we could be doing, we might be doing, and like really bring people down to like, this is what we are doing, this is what we're learning, this is how we're iterating. I had a mentor early in my career, and he told me that the best way to build trust with anyone is, in a working context, is to say what you're going to do, to tell people what you're doing while you do it, and then to tell people what you did, consistently doing more than you said you would do at the outset. And I think that's, again, such great advice for managers and a great opportunity for us as senior leaders to demonstrate that. And this is great. So we're talking about internal pressures. I'd love to quickly run through what data we are looking at in terms of Gen AI tooling adoption at our various organizations. I think it's a question a lot of people have. What's everyone else tracking? In my organization at the New York Times, we're looking at things in two different ways. In terms of hard data, we're looking at weekly active users of our supported Gen AI tooling. We want to see what tools are working well and creating sticky habits, and if and how individual contributors are using AI in their day-to-day workflows. And then I would argue more critically, we're looking at outcome evaluation. We're asking individuals and teams to make some predictions around how they think Gen AI tools, wow, that's really difficult, Gen AI tools will support them in their work before they begin? Do they believe it's going to make their work go faster, be of a higher quality than it might be otherwise? Do they believe they're going to be able to implement something entirely novel that they couldn't have without AI? And then once the task or project is complete, we look back at the assumptions and compare them to reality. Did any of those things actually come true? And comparing AI solutions across a million different tasks and projects is quite challenging. Certainly not apples to apples, but comparing expectations to reality to learn what's actually working for people and what's not is proving to be quite interesting in talking about outcomes. Diego, what about at Microsoft? What metrics are you tracking in terms of adoption?
Well, Microsoft adoption and usage of tools like GitHub Copilot are tracked very, very closely. A bit of vanity metric. I don't see those as success metrics, but I feel that I better define as diagnostic signals. So for me, it's easy to be excited when you see dashboards that are showing 100% usage across your team for weeks, months, quarters, and I've been there excited. But high adoption doesn't mean higher productivity, and low adoption is not always a sign of failure. So you have to pair usage of an adoption with other signals. Things like, in my case at least, fast incidents are mitigated, how smoothly your dev cycle runs, or how much your customer experience was improved. And on the flip side, when adoption drops, it usually means some kind of friction, maybe a usability gap, lack of awareness, or some need of training in one particular space. And that gives you something concrete to fix. So yes, Microsoft tracks adoption, but the real takeaway for me is do not confuse usage with impact. Adoption tells you where to intervene, but not where you have made a difference.
I really hope you're enjoying this video. Do you know Lead Dev offers way more than this?
I'm a fan of the Lead Dev newsletter. I find really practical knowledge about leadership.
Then I was like, oh, there is this big community here doing all of these content, so let me figure out a little more. Let me dig in a little. What do you have?
So make sure you check out leaddev.com.
Absolutely. Massimo, what are you guys doing?
I'm cheating a little with this answer because I'm, let's say, assuming a lot of stuff. Like, I think that all of us work in mature, high-performing engineering organization where we have quite of a set of metrics that are the LT ones, not the classical lines of code. Like, again, I'm assuming a lot of things. I also assume that it's something that is ingrained in the way with my brain works after so many years in this industry on engineers are very smart and they try to find the most efficient way to get things done. And getting things done is the success metric that we track around how long did we take, the sprint points. There are so many different metrics. When you introduce AI tools or Gen AI tools into this equation, and engineers keeps constantly using them week after week, so adoption in this instance, as long as you don't completely forget all the other metrics, right? Of course, if they start using Gen AI tools, but their productivity in whatever way you measure it went down, we have so many more bugs and incidents in production, but like if everything else stayed constant and Gen AI tool adoption increased, at least they're working less. Then what they're doing with the rest of the time, who knows, right? But in a mature organization, I think that adoption of these tools, looking at what's their end goal and what's their target, it's already a robust enough metrics. Then, of course, if I was the CTO of a 3-people startup with no other metric in place, fully agree with Diego that again, adoption by itself is quite risky because who knows about the outcome, but by itself as a first metric to just track over time. And again, I would pick a time horizon that is not, I'm playing around with a new tool just because I have it is free, but something that is meaningful, couple of weeks, 3 weeks, whatever is a sensible cycle in your circumstances. It's solid enough at least to start.
Amazing. Thank you. And Plum, what adoption data are you considering at Row right now?
Yeah, so Row obviously operates in a heavily regulated industry in healthcare. So everything around AI, even if it's only touching the code, not actually touching like anything around healthcare, but just the code that leads to that, we have to be very, very careful about what we're introducing and why. So we get into this interesting pattern where actually our engineers are really looking to adopt a lot of different tooling, and there are certain tools that we need to slow on adopting or work very closely with those vendors to make sure that it can be used in a secure way in our environment. So I would say we're tracking adoption less because it's not something we're trying to optimize for right now, because we see it in the qualitative ways. We don't necessarily need the quantitative metric because we see how folks are engaging with the tools right now, how much they're trying out different things in the tools. So we aren't necessarily going to try and optimize the corner of like, I know that one engineer over there hasn't worked with Claude yet. Like that isn't the problem that I'm necessarily looking to solve right now, because we have so many other things that we're working on and finding value from. Later down the line, we can think about quality and velocity metrics tied to AI-assisted code, which other folks have already brought up, rates of incidents, rates of bugs from AI versus non-AI generated code. But right now, we're really just working on the baseline. I think the flip side is, because we're in a regulated industry, technically, I probably have very specific metrics on how well every single API key is used and what it's used for, but that's not what I'm digging into right now.
Okay, great. And upon will ask further, as this adoption's taking off at Row, practically, how are you encouraging engineers to code with Gen AI without vibe coding themselves out of understanding what they're deploying? And what are the safeguards you're providing?
Yeah, what's interesting is I know vibe coding has come up as this new concept, but it is not a new concept that you are working on code that you don't exactly know how it works, and you ship something and it works and you don't know why, and you just sort of let it slide and hope for the best later on in production. What I think some of this Gen AI tooling changes is how easy it is to get vibe code that works the first time, or works very easily, even if it's not necessarily working correctly. So I want to start with that baseline of vibe coding is not new, it's just gotten easier. When thinking about different controls, I think about the pre-build and the post-build pre-deploy sort of steps. So when you're very much starting out any project, and we're all super familiar with the concept of technical design docs, even if AI is writing our technical design docs, humans are still reading those and discussing those before it goes into build. And we're pretty good at pulling out when a tech design doc is absolute gobbledygook that does not read like any real words. And so if the tech design doc is actually something we could then feed back into AI and get a good outcome from generative code, that is a sign that you have a really well-defined technical design doc. You have a really well-defined spec. So sometimes AI can do that. Often it involves a lot of human intervention still to make sure we understand the problem to be solved. Once we go through the build using whatever tools we desire, when we get to that pre-deploy and we're thinking about testing, it's regression end-to-end testing. Vibe coding is generally less successful the larger and more complex of a system that you need to insert the code into, because it will work really well in a localized part of the system. But when you get through to the larger system end to end, often that falls apart. In healthcare, you change something in the patient experience, that's going to change every single touch point with the patient through all of the different parts of our system and how their provider understands their health. So vibe coding in one space is very likely going to break something down the line. And we have a really robust set of end-to-end tests that capture all of the different parts of our flows. So vibe code really can't get super far.
I love that. We've all been vibe coding for ages. That is the anti-hype that I wanted from this webinar.
It's kind of a new concept, yeah.
We're done. I'll invite the audience. If anyone has any questions, please drop them in chat. And then I also I've been thinking about peer learning, and a webinar like this is a great way to do that. Lead Dev provides so many resources for our abilities as software engineering leaders to connect with other leaders and learn from them. I'm wondering if anyone has an experiment or an approach that you've borrowed from another company or rejected after seeing them try it.
I have one. I don't remember where I got it from, but it's not that I want to steal it. It's just generally don't remember, but it's not mine. So this is particularly important in when you roll out, that could be Gen AI tooling internally, but could be when you roll out Gen AI in the wild, where you can do all the validation checks you want offline, but they can go up to a certain point. An LLM in the wild is an LLM in the wild. leveraging another LLM agent as a judge of the outputs, either before it gets to production or right after for monitoring purposes. This is not enough to not have humans in the loop somewhere for a percentage, allowing to report content, etc., etc. But I come from environments or industries where indeed there is human moderation or nothing. Having this hybrid where you can have another LLM that has a different, like LLMs are imperfect, but another LLM provider or technology from yours could be imperfect in other ways, right? So they can complement each other. Was an interesting paradigm shift to, okay, so it's not just nothing or a human that is very expensive, very costly. Nothing, an LLM as a judge, a human in some cases. Now it's quite widespread in the industry, but I don't remember where I stole it from, but I stole it, I used it, and it worked.
That's a great thing to steal. Amazing. And we have had a couple questions come in. Thank you so much, everyone. We have two different questions that are around non-determinism. Asking the group to talk a little bit more about the non-deterministic nature of AI responses, some specific examples or solutions, and what an acceptable failure rate might look like.
I can take this since I was chatting about non-determinism, and again, I'm not even sure if non-determinism in this instance. I don't want to go into philosophy of computer science, but I was the one saying determinism, and I can correct myself. More than like there are two questions. Like the acceptable failure rate strongly depends on the environment, strongly depends on what are you solving for. I can make you examples, but the more classical precision, recall, statistical metrics, there isn't a solution fits all where I would say, okay, always prioritize for this, always prioritize for that. A fraud detection system is completely different than the recommendation algorithm from Netflix. Let's say they are both AI-based, but they have completely different tolerance for these kind of things. And the reality is that it's non-deterministic, yes, but at massive scale, and that's the art of validation set and validation offline. At massive scale, you try to even out this complexity, try to get metrics that are robust enough, and you get confidence not in the specific circumstance or the specific case. Actually, it's the opposite. Metrics at scale offline and some online as well is what is allowing you to go to production with the confidence that, yes, bad things happen, to say it elegantly, bad things happen, but I have good degree of confidence on in which circumstance they happen and for which percentage of the user. So it's not something that you, and probably this is related, and it's an amazing question, to the paradigm shift that was needed and the complexity of rolling out AI, non-AI systems. You don't have to fix this. You need to deal with this in a robust and mature way because it's part of the game.
Yeah, and I think it's very difficult to define one specific failure rate that will apply to all cases. It will depend on the context, on the scenarios. You cannot say it's 10%, it's 5%, or whatever that is. In our case, I can give an example of a particular tool that we're working on that's going to be used to accelerate our response during incidents. So it's a tool that consumes some pieces of data, and then it produces recommendations of what the next paths are to explore. And where we want to make the tool as smart as possible, in some cases, it will lead to directions that might not be the right ones, depending on the case, depending on the scenarios. So the way we're addressing the issue is, for once, trying to put the constraints in the chain of prompts that are part of the response. And the other thing is, instead of providing one full answer, what we're providing maybe in some cases are options with traffic lights. For this given incident, this is the most likely cause of the problem, so you should investigate it. But it might be this other thing, it might be other things. We don't put a number, but we put an order. We say this is the most reasonable root cause for this particular issue, and this is something that you might explore if the first one doesn't work. So we give options to the users just to address the cases where the tool might not be giving something that's actually the truth.
Yeah, and I'll add one additional thought. So I think something that's very useful is having the tooling built for correction when something in production isn't working as expected. So you can do all the things in the world to test and to set AI features up when putting them out into production to give you the correct responses. And being non-deterministic, we have to know exactly what we're going to do, what the process is, what the tool is to fix something when it comes back and is incorrect. So for cooking, again, looking at our feature where we're doing metrics conversion, we have a tool that our customer care support team, when someone reports, hey, this conversion was not right, we can go in and immediately fix that. And I think that is something that builds confidence, not just for the engineering team, but for the broader organization, and can get us all a little bit more comfortable with this non-deterministic state. Let's jump to a different question. What security concerns are top of the list to manage when integrating AI, and what are you doing about them?
I feel like since I mentioned security, I will talk a bit about the concerns for security reasons. I can't say specifically what we're like some of the specific tactics I can't speak to directly, but I think about onboarding a new AI tool kind of like onboarding a new contractor or new human onto your organization. You have to figure out where their machine's going to be and what access they're going to have. So AI obviously takes a lot of compute power. Where is that compute living? Is that in a are we using a third-party vendor? Is it then in their data centers? Who has access to that data then? Or are we saying we want to use a given algorithm, but we're going to host it on our cloud servers or our instance or our sandbox? Just putting a gate around who has access to anything that's happening in and out of those different, I'm using ChatGPT as the mental model, but any of those back and forth conversations. You also then want to think about AI is obviously more powerful when it has more context, but the downside to that is more context is more access to information that we do or do not know if the AI should have or wants to have. So we want to be very clear on what are the data permissions AI has, what permissions can it potentially provision for itself, which is ideally none, but we want to make sure that AI does not find a way to basically give itself a sort of admin access or a higher level access. And then where is all the data that it pulls in lives. We also then very much monitor how folks are using LLMs, AI, ChatGPT. What data are people pasting in that isn't necessarily what we gave when we set up the AI tool, but as people are interacting it, monitoring any data that's coming in, and also monitoring on the other side data coming out to see if AI has either gotten access to anything or is starting to hallucinate in ways that are then polluting our internal data systems. These are all examples. They're not things that have happened in real life at our company because we take a lot of care and have been introducing things very slowly into the environment with a lot of monitoring to ensure that that does not happen.
Awesome. Anyone else put any thoughts to share on security? I feel like that was pretty comprehensive. Oh, amazing. Lovely question. How would you go about including knowledge bases and context rules into your repositories for AI agents to understand your particular development practices best?
Well, we're doing a couple of things in regards to that. First, we're augmenting our code base. Each one of the repos has what will be outside world agents MD. So you have one particular configuration file where you can put the rules, the things that you want AI or an assistant to check before they are submitted for review. So, and that depends much on the knowledge of SMEs on that particular code base that can provide, based on their experience, what's the best practices to use, what are the best things to do. We use that for, especially for database schema changes. We do that in services where performance, reliability is very critical. And the other way we use that, and the question mentions knowledge bases. We consume, we absorb, we ingested all our wikis and internal documentation into agents that answer your questions. And the tricky part is the answers, the quality of the answers depends on how good the inputs were. So we're coming back to a place where if someone at some point says, well, documentation is an afterthought, doesn't matter, we can do that later. We all come to realize how important documentation is and how important it is to have humans, people dedicated to produce that in good quality so it can be consumed by the tools and then facilitated in terms of giving answers back to people looking for them by using AI. Those are the two things, those are the two ways in which we are using it. I think we're just starting with the augmentation of repos. I think that we're getting much better results or much immediate results with the assistants, the kind of a search questions and answers, because the massive amounts of documentations that we have distributed all over the place, it's very hard to find something, no matter how good your search engine is. And LLM models are amazing on doing that for us.
I've had this little sound bite I keep coming back to, which is that AI is an accelerator for what is, or a force multiplier for what is. So if you want AI to magically manage your documentation strategy or your data discoverability problems that you're having, but everything underneath that isn't set up, there is no documentation to borrow from, there are no guidelines, it's going to take whatever engineering practices you have and it's going to accelerate them tenfold. So, and that's the same for management, frankly, like we're talking about high quality communication. That's not a skill that you had very robustly practiced. It's probably going to show up in this higher stakes situation. Okay, that's enough of me pontificating. Thank you so much for all the insights. This has been so great. Let's wrap up this part of the conversation before we take it to Slack. As a final share, if you each had to give one piece of advice to a leader who wants to create a team that is pragmatic about AI, what would it be? Diego?
Okay, I was finding trouble finding the unmute button. Piece of advice. I'll say always start with the problem, not the technology. If you're not solving a pain people actually feel, it won't stick. And because we discussed that these systems are non-deterministic, sometimes you get great results and sometimes disappointing. It's better to start small. So you pick one pain point, you experiment with it, and you keep iterating. And later you can shape the things to be more consistent, more reliable, and easier to scale. And the other thing that Plum said, share your learnings across the org, hits and misses. Adoption spreads a lot faster when people see the impact in their own work, in their own workflows. So for me, pragmatic AI adoption is 3 things: anchor on the problem, start small, and build from there.
That'll be the little advertisement video that we put on LinkedIn. Thank you so much. Love it. Massimo.
Amazing question, but I would give probably the same answer that I would give if anyone would ask me, how would you set up a team to solve for problem X? That could be Y, could be any problem. AI doesn't make any difference having a strong team of product-minded engineers. Then probably I agree with everything Diego said, and probably like strong and product-minded engineers would do exactly that, because again, the recipe for AI is the exact recipe that was there with some nuances, because again, the engineers always have to deal with uncertainty, new technologies, etc. And of course, it's a paradigm shift as potentially others. Strong program-minded engineers, 99% of our success as leaders is the people that we are lucky enough to work with and to potentially hire. So same advice that I would give for any other problem.
Perfect. And Plum.
Yeah, I mean, not much more to add on top of those. So I'll say yes to all of that. And in terms of the specific people on the team, it's product-minded folks, and build a balanced team in terms of people who have certain feelings about AI. So don't build a team of just all early adopters, because you're going to get a lot of excitement and a lot of experiments, but not necessarily a lot of that pullback and guardrails. And don't build with all skeptics, because they aren't going to want to build. But if you have that mix of some of the AI early adopters and some of the AI skeptics, it gives you that checks and balances of the folks who are going to be really excited, experiment, and the folks who are going to ask the tough questions, help find that balance in the build.
Thank you all. Everyone, we will all be in the webinar Q&A Lead Dev Slack channel to answer the questions we didn't get to here in this session. And please feel free, anyone, to ask anything else that's on your mind over there. Thank you for joining. We'll see you in Slack, and I really hope to see you next time.
Thanks all.